The roof in the noonday sun. Wind shoved grit across the empty street, rattling a loose shutter high on the old Dry Creek General Store. Elias Crow squinted against the white glare, the kind that turned the boards of a building into blinding planks and made the sky feel like a hot iron laid over the earth. Something moved up there. Not the shutter, not the sagging sign. Hair, gold hair. It hung over the edge, swaying slow in the noon breeze. Elias stepped closer, boots whispering against the dust. The wind carried the dry creak of a rope drawn tight. The board above seemed to breathe in the heat. And there, clear as the sound of a nail tapping a coffin lid, was the scrape of a rope not rubbing against wood. A body, a woman's body. She was strung up along the ridge of the roof, arms bound, dress torn. Sunlight struck her hair until it hurt to look at. Across the front of her bodice, letters black and warped, burned into the cloth itself, read Apache lover. The words cut sharper than any knife. Her head lolled forward, skin gone pale, lips cracked. The wind rocked her gently, like some cruel parody of a cradle. Elias's hand went to the roofline, boards hot under his palm, splinters pressing into his calluses. He tested the wood under the overhang, dry, brittle, but it'd hold. He stepped onto a barrel, boot soles sliding just a breath, and hauled himself up. The roof pitched steep under his weight. Tar paper peeled in strips, flapping against his leg. He crawled toward her, each movement setting the rope to creak and groan. Up close, the heat rolling off her skin was fierce, too fierce for someone already gone cold. Alive. A faint tremor worked through her wrists. Easy, Elias muttered, though his voice was no louder than the dry whine of the wind. His knife slid free from its sheath with a low rasp. One quick draw across the rope, fibers parting with a rough snap, and she slumped forward into his arms. Her weight was nothing, all bone and heat, but the angle was awkward on the pitched roof. He steadied her, felt the thud of her heart fluttering too fast. Her head rolled against his shoulder. She breathed something, words torn by thirst. Painted riders. The rest was lost as her breath snagged. He eased her down the slope, boots digging for purchase, and dropped the last 5 feet to the street. Dust billowed up around them. The boards of the general store loomed behind, groaning as if the building itself had been holding its breath. He laid her on a patch of shade against the wall. Her dress clung in places where sweat had darkened the cloth. The burnt letters across her front seemed to smolder even in shadow. Her eyelids flickered. The color of her eyes was hard to pin, something pale, clouded with pain. Her lips moved again, man in black. Then she was gone under, breath shallow, face slack. Elias stood, scanning the street. Nothing but empty windows and doorways. Yet the air carried the weight of eyes. The quiet was too neat, like a saloon table cleared too fast after the dealer's last card. He crouched, lifted her, and started toward the far end of town. His boots sank slightly in the hot dust. No sound but his own steps and the faint rattle of her breathing. A horse stamped somewhere out of sight, leather creaking under a shifting saddle. Elias didn't turn his head. He passed the last building, a weather-leaned livery with half its boards missing, and found his gelding in the thin shade of a mesquite. The horse flicked an ear, but stayed still as Elias settled the woman across the saddle, tying her gently in place with his bedroll so she wouldn't slide. The wind carried the faint clink of spurs from behind him. One set, slow, deliberate. Elias swung up into the saddle without looking back. The gelding's muscles bunched under him. He touched the reins, and they moved on, hooves crunching the hard pan. The sound of spurs faded, swallowed by the hiss of the wind. The desert opened ahead, miles of bleached stone and yellow scrub. Heat shimmered on the horizon, bending the far ridges into wavering shapes. Behind them, Dry Creek shrank to a smear of shadow at the base of the hills. He didn't look back until the roofs were gone from sight. Only then did he let the tension ease from his shoulders, though his hand stayed near the butt of the Colt under his coat. The woman stirred once more. "Don't let him." It broke into a cough, weak and dry. Elias pulled the canteen from his saddle horn, held it to her lips. She swallowed a little, enough to stop the cough, then fell still again. The trail climbed, switchbacking toward the mountains. A lone hawk circled far above, its shadow skimming over them in brief, cool passes. Somewhere up there, beyond the first ridge, his cabin waited. 3 rooms of timber and stone, and the space between them and town full of miles no one crossed without meaning to. The geldings' breathing slowed as they neared the first stretch of pine shade. The air cooled just enough to take the sting from the sun. Elias glanced once at the letters burned into the woman's dress. The black marks sat there like a verdict, like something meant to follow her even if she lived. He'd seen words used as brands before, on stock, on men, on women. They never washed away, no matter how much time passed. The wind shifted, carrying the faint echo of a shutter slamming back in Dry Creek. Could have been the wind. Could have been something else. Elias rode on without looking back, the tracks in the dust. A coffee pot hissed on the stove. Elias slid the tin cup across the table. The woman's fingers trembled as she reached, steam curling into the hollows under her eyes. She drank slow, her gaze fixed on the wall as though afraid something might look back. "I need to find my brother," she said. Her voice was rough, stripped of anything soft. Elias didn't answer. He was at the door, coat already on, rifle balanced in the crook of his arm. The gelding's hooves clicked against the frozen earth outside the cabin. Sun was just climbing the rim of the mountains, lighting the far desert in red and gold. Elias swung into the saddle and pointed him down the narrow cut between the rocks. The trail widened near the base, opening to the empty flats between him and Dry Creek. Dust lifted in thin veils under the horse's stride. When he reached the edge of town, nothing moved. The silence had weight. A mangy dog nosed through a trash heap beside the boarding house, ribs working under its hide. From the saloon side door came the faint clink of bottles, then nothing. Elias kept to the shade side of the street. His eyes passed over the storefronts without pausing, but every window felt like a shuttered watchtower. By the time he reached the far end, the street's only fresh marks showed themselves. 3 sets of hoof prints, deep from a hard gallop, heading north. The edges still held shape. Whoever made them had passed not long before. Elias crouched, tracing a boot tip along the print. The dust was fine here, catching in the air with the faintest breath of wind. Beyond the last print, the marks stretched toward the ridge they called Red Hollow. He straightened and turned back toward the saloon. The door's hinges gave a long squeal. Inside, the air was stale with smoke and sweat soaked into the floorboards. A card table sat under the front window, for chairs occupied. Conversation stopped as the door closed. A man with a scar splitting his jawline set down his cards, slow. "Don't see you in here much, Crow." Elias stepped to the bar. "Coffee." The bartender, a short, hollow-eyed fellow, poured from a blackened pot. The cup landed on the bar without a word. Elias took one sip. "Northbound riders. 3 of them. Which way after Red Hollow?" No one answered. The card players had gone still as fence posts. The bartender dried his hands on a rag, eyes on the counter. "Some men dig silver," he said at last. "Some dig graves." Elias set the cup down, coins following. The scrape of metal on wood sounded louder than it should have. When he stepped back into the street, sunlight had shifted. The shadows of 3 mounted riders leaned long across the dirt at the far end of town. They were turned his way, but too far to make out faces. Elias walked to his horse without hurry, swung into the saddle, and headed for the trail home. The riders stayed where they were until he was nearly out of sight. The mountains swallowed the sun early. Long fingers of shade were crawling across the trail when Elias crested the rise to his cabin. The gelding stopped short, ears pricked forward. Elias's eyes swept the clearing. Nothing moved. The chimney was cold, too cold for someone who'd left only this morning. He dismounted, boots crunching on gravel. The first shot cracked from the tree lean, close enough for bark to spit from the post beside his head. Elias dropped behind the corner of the cabin, drawing the Colt in the same breath. A second shot rang out. Wood splintered near the window. He slid low along the wall, eyes narrowing on the shadow, shifting between the pines. His first return shot kicked dust at a man's boots, forcing him back. The air filled with the reek of powder. Footsteps pounded to his left, another man circling wide. Elias pivoted, fired once. The shape stumbled, cursed, and went down, clutching a leg. The third one broke cover near the creek, firing as he ran. Elias took the shot with no pause. The man dropped, his revolver tumbling into the grass. Silence came back all at once, broken only by the groan of the wounded. Elias reloaded slow, the rhythm of it steady. He stepped over the man by the creek, dead already, and crossed to the trees. The second one was gone, leaving a dark trail of blood into the rocks. The first lay face down, still. Back at the cabin, the door was open. Claire stood in the shadows, one hand on the frame, the other holding his Winchester. Her eyes were wide, fixed on him. "You've done this before," she said. The words hung there, heavy in the cool evening air. The war behind his eyes. The moon carved the ridges in silver. Elias's hands worked in the glow of the lantern, buckling the cinch, tightening saddlebags. The gelding's breath steamed in the cold air. Behind him, the cabin door creaked. "You're leaving tonight?" Claire said. He didn't answer. The Winchester was already tied to the saddle. She stepped closer. The lamplight caught the blackened letters burned into her dress, Apache lover, and made them shine like wet tar. "You think they'll stop just because you killed 3 of them?" Elias's eyes flicked past her, toward the dark timberline. Every gust through the pines sounded like low voices. "You've done this before," she said again, softer this time. The gelding shifted under his hand. Leather creaked. Somewhere far off, a coyote barked. She planted herself in his path. "You owe me the truth." Elias looked at her, the lamplight reflecting in his eyes like the glint off a cold barrel. For a long breath, nothing moved. Then he turned toward the trail without a word. "Then I'll follow you," she said. Her voice didn't tremble. He stopped. The wind carried the faint scent of mesquite smoke from the valley. Slowly, he untied the second horse from the post. They rode at first light, hooves knocking frost from the grass. The mountains fell behind, the desert opening ahead in great, empty swells. Sunlight struck the rocks, turning them the color of blood. At the edge of Red Hollow, the wind shifted. The smell of old fires clung to the canyon walls. A figure stepped from the shadow of a boulder, a man tall and lean, his skin the copper of the land itself, eyes dark and sharp. The paint across his cheeks was faded, but the way he held his rifle said he wasn't here for talk. Elias reined in. The man looked past him to Claire. "Why'd you bring her?" "Because they'll kill her if I don't," Elias said. The man's gaze lingered on her dress, on the words burned there. Then he jerked his head toward the canyon. They followed him through a winding cut where the sun barely touched the ground. The path opened into a hollow, the ruins of a mining camp. Rusted pans, broken tools, the frame of a sluice leaning drunkenly over the dry stream bed. Another man stepped out from behind the sluice. His skin was lighter, hair black, eyes a pale gray that didn't belong to either side of the frontier. His clothes were torn, boots scuffed to the hide. "Jonah," Claire whispered. His mouth tightened. "Your brother's dead." The words landed heavy in the cold air. She didn't move. Jonah's gaze shifted to Elias. "The mine's owners are clearing out anyone with Apache blood. They pay riders to brand M traders, run him out, or put him in the ground. Then they take the claims. Your woman was meant to be an example." "She's not my woman," Elias said. Jonah's mouth curved in something that wasn't a smile. "Doesn't matter. They think she is." The wind rattled an empty can against the rocks. Somewhere in the cliffs above, a stone clattered loose. Claire stepped toward Jonah. "Then we go to the law." He shook his head. "Law's on the payroll." Elias looked past them to the canyon mouth. The light there had gone flatter, shadows lengthening in the ridges. "You know what this means, Crow?" Jonah said. Elias's jaw worked once. He turned his head slightly, eyes narrowing as if the desert itself had spoken. The man who'd brought them here watched him carefully. "You walked away once." "Didn't change a thing," Elias said. Claire's voice cut through. "Then what will?" No one answered. Far out on the desert floor, 3 riders appeared as black dots against the pale earth. The dots grew, dust rising behind them in a thin tail. Elias slid the Colt from its holster, spun the cylinder once, and eased it back into place. The wind picked up, cold now, carrying grit that whispered over the rocks. Jonah checked the load in his rifle. "We could be gone before they get here." Elias's eyes never left the riders. Not this time. The first echo of hoofbeats reached the hollow, bouncing off the canyon walls. Claire stood rigid, her hands curling into fists at her sides. The letters on her dress seemed to glare in the dim light, each one a challenge. The riders slowed at the mouth of the hollow, silhouettes hard against the sky. One of them, broad in the shoulders, coat black as pitch, sat still while the other two fanned out. Elias stepped forward, boots crunching in the gravel. The wind caught the brim of his hat, lifting it just enough to show the lines carved deep in his face. The last bullet in Dry Creek. The street was empty, save for the dust drifting low to the ground. Elias Crow's boots hit that dust first, the sound sharp in the still morning air. Claire walked at his side, her jaw tight, Jonah a step behind with the rifle resting easy in his hands. From the far end, the mine owner stood with 6 men spread across the width of the street. Behind them, townsfolk filled doorways, eyes darting between faces but never settling long on any one man. The wind dragged grit across the boards of the saloon porch. The mine owner's black coat lifted slightly at the edges. "Crow," he called, voice deep enough to carry. "You should have stayed gone." Elias kept walking. Each step sounded heavier than it was. His eyes weren't on the mine owner. They were on the man to his right, dressed in black from hat to boots, the brim low over his brow. That man's hand hovered near the grip of his revolver. Claire's breath quickened beside him. Jonah shifted his weight, the creak of leather sharp in the silence. Halfway down the street, Elias stopped. The man in black smiled without showing teeth. "You owe me for last time," the man said. Elias's voice came quiet. "I paid." The man's fingers twitched. The mine owner's hand lifted, just enough to signal. It broke fast. Gunfire cracked like splitting wood. The first shot from Jonah's rifle dropped one of the hired guns before the man could clear leather. Claire ducked behind a water trough, Colt in both hands, firing low. The sharp smell of powder filled the air. Elias moved straight ahead, his draw so quick it looked like the revolver appeared in his hand by itself. 2 shots, 2 men down. A slug hit the saloon post inches from Claire's head, splintering wood into her hair. She fired back, her shot catching the shooter high in the chest. He folded without a sound. Jonah grunted, staggered back with blood running down his arm. Elias's hand clamped his shoulder, steadying him just long enough to line up another shot. The man in black stayed still, waiting. His gun never rose until Elias was 10 paces away. When it did, both moved in the same breath. The report of their pistols slammed together in the air. For an instant, no one moved. Then the man in black's gun slipped from his hand. He took one slow step back before falling, dust puffing around him. The mine owner's face went hard. He turned, pushing through the remaining riders, but a single shot from Elias's Colt kicked the dirt at his boots. "You leave this town," Elias said, voice carrying now. "You don't come back." No one spoke. The mine owner's gaze slid over the bodies in the street, then back to Elias. He spat into the dust, turned, and mounted up. His men followed without a word. The only sounds left were the wind and the slow creak of the saloon sign. Elias reloaded, each click echoing in the stillness. Claire stepped out from behind the trough, her hand steady now, eyes locked on him. Jonah leaned against the hitch rail, breathing hard but still upright. No one in the street moved toward them. Some looked away. A few just stared. Elias holstered the Colt, turned, and started walking. The gelding waited at the far end of the street, reins hanging loose. "Where will you go?" Claire asked. He didn't look back. The saddle creaked under his weight. The horse shifted once, then stilled. "Some men come to the west to be remembered," he said. "I came to be forgotten." The horse moved forward. Dust rose, swallowing the sound of his leaving. Behind him, Dry Creek stood silent in the morning sun.